What's up, everybody? It's Alex from Heavy New York, and on the phone, we got Chris from Winterfylleth. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having us. We're really happy to speak to you.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you here. So, the newest album is A Reckoning Dawn, which is coming out a week from today on May 8th via Spine Farm Candlelight. What I'm curious about is this a direct follow-up to your previous record, The Harrowing of Haredom, or do you think that this is like a new start for Winterfylleth in a way?
So the last album, as you may know, was an acoustic album.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's a new start necessarily, but obviously this is a full kind of heavy black metal album. So I guess stylistically, immediately it's different. I don't know if it's a new start necessarily. I think we kind of Winterfylleth kind of found our sound a long time ago, and I think that we've always tried to sort of play around with maybe what that can be, but I think we know that we're a black metal band, and that's the kind of music that we're trying to make. So it's I guess that comes with some limitations, but I'm hoping that people hear some new influences and some, I guess, more considered choices in this new album, perhaps, given some of the things we learned from doing the previous album. Obviously we had an acoustic album that we made, and it was quite an undertaking for us to do as a band that normally writes metal, having to figure out how you write for instruments that you don't play, like cello and violin, and layering lots of kind of harmonized vocals and things like that. So I think when you've done that and gone through that process and figured out how to find atmosphere in, without the distortion, without the kind of heavy drums and all the kind of the things you can do with reverb and all the sort of tools you have in a heavy band, it really kind of frames what this new record can become and how you approach the writing of that. So I guess, I hope that people are kind of hear that we've learned from that and have made something, interesting and engaging as a result.
Yeah, well, being that the last album was like an acoustic folk album, did maybe like experimenting with that style and experimenting with that instrumentation maybe teach you new things on how to incorporate into returning to a heavier style?
I think unquestionably so, yeah. Like I said, when you're writing on essentially like nylon string guitars that are not known for their particularly kind of strong resonance or their ring off or delay or anything like that, they're quite dry instruments to play with, and obviously they're more synonymous with classical music. When you use those, you're not finding that same kind of atmosphere through the notes on their own. You have to kind of find it in other ways. So you have to think about how the acoustic guitar can fit around things like cello or violin or strings. You have to figure out how you can create atmosphere with the way that you structure songs and everything like that. So it was a huge thing for us to kind of do that, and I think we were definitely kind of mindful of the fact that we wanted to kind of take some of those learnings and actually kind of genuinely do that rather than just sort of talk about it in interviews. Like we generally felt like we sort of had some of those things at the back of our mind about, does this really need a lead guitar part here, or are we just kind of putting it in, or how does this kind of lead guitar fit around the rhythm guitar and the vocals and all that sort of stuff. So I'm hoping that challenged us to kind of think about atmosphere and song structuring in a different way, and obviously while it's not directly related sonically, I think conceptually and structurally there's a lot of learnings that we took from that.
Yeah. Well, when you look at the entirety of your discography, when going from The Reckoning Dawn to The Ghost of Heritage to The Dark Hereafter, so on and so forth, is it almost like kind of like a representation of who you are at that particular time? Is it almost kind of like a self-portrait in a way?
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. I think so in a way. Yeah. I mean, undoubtedly, when you're obviously the Ghost of Heritage, for example, came out in 2008. So 12 years ago. So we were in our kind of early to mid 20s then, where now we're kind of, pushing 40. So it's undoubtedly a reflection of where you are. We were quite new to making black metal albums then, and and I think we've definitely kind of refined that and added to that and learned from that over the many albums we've made and all the other things we've been involved in around Winterfylleth. So I think they have to be a reflection of who you are at that moment in time. And I think people, when they judge bands, like to think of them as sort of static entities who, you know, are almost kind of bound by a certain set of rules. But I think you have to be able to adapt who you are and to kind of learn from the things that you've done. Because if you don't, then I think you don't grow as people or as creative entities.
Yeah, well, I've always said that art is a living thing in itself, in which it's created and it eventually grows and develops and leaves a legacy. So I think in the end, especially for you guys, your albums almost have like a life of their own, and maybe you as the artist are in like their humble guide in a way.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I hope so. But it's a strange thing, isn't it? Because you know, I don't think you make an album wondering or worrying about how it's going to have an impact on culture or society. You just sort of you have these kind of moments that you kind of pick out from the ether and are able to kind of commit to a recording that you hope have an impact on people emotionally or physically or whatever it might be, or even like, you know, they're interested in the kind of stories you're talking about. And when they do, it's amazing. And, you know, the amount of messages that we and, you know, I'm sure other bands get about how people have kind of really kind of fallen in love with their albums, or they've helped them through certain parts of their life, or they've just kind of helped them express something that they never knew could be expressed in music. You know, you get these things, and it really kind of adds a whole different level on what you're doing. And I guess when you're making your early albums, and not as many people like you as maybe they do when you make your later albums, you probably have no concept of those things, and it's a strange kind of evolution that you have to go through. But it's a welcome one, and I don't know, an insightful one in many ways as to how far-reaching, you know, the music that four guys from just outside Manchester can make.
Mm-hmm. Now, being a vocalist, do you need to hear music in order to come up with lyrics, or could there ever be a time where you have like a concept or a story or even lyrics written, and that can help determine the outcome of the music?
I mean, I think that's a super personal choice, actually. For myself, we have quite a way that we do that. Like we never write music with the lyrics in mind. And the lyrics always come after the music. And while I don't think that means that the lyrics are less important than the music, I just think that if you let one guide the other, you can find yourself with some strange stylistic choices trying to cram vocals into certain bits of music. So whenever we make it up, there is always a broad concept. And before, I guess, anything is written, generally speaking, we've always come up with the title and the broad theme of the album. So in this instance, The Reckoning Dawn, that was very much kind of cemented in our minds before we started writing a lot of material. So we wrote a lot of the music, and then I wrote the lyrics, and Dan wrote some of the lyrics separately. So it then comes to kind of finding which of the musical compositions sort of suits the lyrical theme or the concept the best, and then kind of working one around the other. So that's how we do it, but, you know, I think lots of bands find different ways of doing it. Either they have the lyrics first and stuff, but to me, I think you can end up restricting yourself musically if you try and fit music around lyrics.
Yeah, nothing could be more heartbreaking, right, than having like the best lyrics ever, and then they always go like one syllable over or under the actual arrangements.
Yeah. Or like trying to rhyme words that don't rhyme or whatever, and making funny kind of like vocal phrases out of them and things like that. You know, there's lots of kind of crazy ways people have done things.
Yeah, before you know it, like, instead of writing a black metal album, it'll feel like you're dropping bars in a rap battle.
Yeah, and obviously that stuff has its place, but, you know, that's not our kind of our state of being. So, you know, it's very much about the music and the atmosphere, and then the vocals working with that to kind of add to the atmosphere. And I think lots of the times, lots of bands forget that vocals can be an instrument, and they just sort of have them on there and have them really loud because they feel like they've got something to say. And I think while we like to think that we do as well, we also use them as a texture at points too. So it's not just you know, obviously there is something we have to say, but sometimes it can add a nice kind of harshness or different feeling to a section.
Yeah. Well, I've also noticed that, like, especially with this new album, it almost feels like that there's like almost different vibes or different emotions in it as well. Like, Misdeeds of Faith, like, had a different vibe than Absolved in Fire or A Greatness Undone. Do you almost kind of like try to capture a moment with each song in a way?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm not sure whether we do that fully intentionally, but I think when you hear a song like Misdeeds of Faith, it's really quite aggressive and straight in your face, and probably one of the most kind of upfront Winterfylleth songs there's ever been. And so when we were picking which lyrics went with each song, it had to kind of somehow tie in with it, so that without getting too far into it, like Misdeeds of Faith is broadly about the kind of crazy things that people with serious religious conviction do in the name of their faith. And it's not necessarily limited to any particular faith, but more just the idea of someone with intense religious feeling, that the kind of, the sort of acts of faith that they kind of put themselves through, be that kind of, I don't know, terrorism or war or some of the kind of crazy crusades that people go on. I'm sure you get the sense of that. And it felt like that was quite fitting with the vibe of the music. Whereas a song like Absolved in Fire, it needed a bit more time to grow and to breathe. And I think that the lyrics on that are about the idea of almost like purifying fire in a way, and like the idea of like phoenix emerging from the ashes. So that there are kind of insidious and subversive ideas that exist in society that are more or less put out there to kind of keep people down and to kind of sort of break their spirit and to keep them working and subservient to almost like, I don't know, whatever it is, corporations, banks, finance, governments, structures of power that kind of keep them down. And I think that it's about almost like the idea of sort of setting those bad ideas on fire and starting again. And so when you contrast those things, you have to find a song that kind of matches the feeling or the sentiment of the lyrics you're trying to put across. And so I'm hoping we paired those things quite well. And the idea of A Reckoning Dawn is about change and about new birth and about like light kind of defeating darkness and stuff. And so obviously one of the most epic songs on the album is the title track, and I think that that's on purpose because it matched the sentiment of the lyrics. So that's kind of how we do it anyway.
Yeah. Well, do you try to leave the music open to interpretation, or do you try to maybe engage the listener into what the music can be about?
I mean, I suppose with the lyrics, there's often a kind of indirect and a direct story within them, and so a lot of the time they're based on a particular kind of old piece of folklore or history or an old poem or story, but then how that relates to the modern world. And so you can either read it for what it is, which is a kind of reflection of ancient culture and an interesting kind of point of history and a window in on the old cultures of the British Isles, for example, or you can kind of see it for what it might be as well, which is I guess a reflection of the modern world and how history is cyclical and how we end up fighting the same battles in the modern era that our ancestors and our forebears fought in their era, and how history has a strange way of repeating itself despite the fact that we're more technologically advanced these days.
Yeah, that's a very good way of putting it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
that's kind of the main vibe anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what I find unique is you almost kind of like look for inspiration to write music or even write lyrics, or do ideas sometimes just come out of the blue sometimes?
I mean, musically, I think musically you kind of have to be in the right mindset and always have a guitar lying around. I think is a good thing to do, and to try and kind of pluck those moments out of the ether when they emerge to you and record them, because I think sometimes bands kind of go into the studio with half-baked ideas and hope something great will come in those moments of focus. And I think you don't always write your best material in those situations. I think you have to be kind of live to the fact that inspiration can kind of come at odd times, or even if you're just kind of messing around, on a guitar while the TV's on or whatever's happening in your life. And you can have those moments of genesis, and then you need to kind of focus on them, sort of distill them. So for us, we never stop writing particularly, and there's always stuff going on around when we're making albums. But we come together for maybe 6 months, 2 or 3 times a week, and try and distill those kind of raw ideas into something more formalized. And I guess that's how those albums are born. So. Obviously inspiration can come from anywhere, and I guess lots of musicians do that in different ways. But for me, it's just about kind of, making sure that you play. I think a lot of musicians forget that. You end up caught up in the touring cycle, and we've only got 6 weeks to make this album or whatever, and so you can kind of end up putting substandard material out because you have to release an album. And I think we've always been quite cognizant of the fact that we don't want to do that. We want to have the time to kind of review and to critique and to self-edit and to make sure that we're putting out something that's good and not just for the sake of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I'm really curious about is because you've labeled yourself as a black metal band, and I don't deny that in any way or form. But like when you compare like Mayhem to a band like Behemoth, and you compare that to like Dimmu Borgir, and then you compare that to a band like Death Heaven, for example, it almost seems like black metal has evolved so much. Is there any experimentation within your realm of Winterfylleth as well? Especially since you put out that acoustic album 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think so. It's a strange one, really, and obviously the idea of black metal has been around a long time. I guess ever since bands like Venom kind of coined it. But if you think about those early kind of Bathory albums, or you think about the bands that kind of came around then, the Dark Thrones and the Burzums and the Satyricons and everything, and there was an idea of what that stuff was then, and that kind of nihilistic, satanic, occultism, all those kinds of things that sort of popped up in the music. And I guess for us, it was, which is maybe indicative of all those other bands you speak about there, I guess we tried to make it our own a little bit in a way. So obviously we love all those bands, and Enslaved and Ulver and Thorns and Emperor and all those kind of bands that kind of came out of those scenes in the Scandinavian scene particularly. But then how do you relate that to being a band from 2006 as opposed to a band from 1987 or something, or 1991 or something? You have to kind of take what it was and kind of try and make it relevant for you. So because we're not from Norway, and because Thor and Fenris, the wolf, and all the kind of the more obvious Norse mythology that people talk about, because that's not immediately ours, I suppose, then we sort of tried to take the things that were from where we're from and turn them into, I guess, UK black metal. And while obviously the medium is similar, it doesn't make sense for us to kind of be in corpse paint or to be speaking about some of those more kind of nihilistic or evil sentiments, because we have to react to our own environment. So we were talking about things like the natural world, or how history from the ancient world relates to the kind of social situation of now, or how we kind of exploit nature for our own selfish gains, when really we should live in harmony with nature, because if we don't, then we won't be able to breathe the air, we won't be able to drink the water, and all those kind of things. So I guess you have to kind of put a slightly different slant on it to be able to relate it to those things. And because it's not focused on, like I said before, evil and nihilism or whatever, then it needs a slightly different approach. And so obviously we stayed away from corpse paint, we stayed away from that lo-fi sound, and had a bit more production in our albums and stuff, and tried to find the atmosphere in different ways. So
yeah, and you don't go by an alias either.
Yeah, it's a strange one, because I've been in bands before, because people knew I was starting this band. It felt strange for me to be like, I don't know, some pseudonym as opposed to me, even though that maybe there's a mystery to that and an otherness to that, but I guess it just wouldn't have held up as well, because we weren't coming out of nowhere. We'd made 5 or 6 albums with the previous bands that we were in, and we were kind of reasonably well known in the UK underground, if nowhere else. So it didn't feel like we could kind of get away with that stuff, and nor did we feel it mattered, because although we are kind of normal people who are in the band, and we just go by our names in the band as opposed to a pseudonym. I suppose the band isn't really about the idea of us as individuals, and to humanize it is slightly weird because it's I guess it's supposed to be about the kind of the atmosphere and the otherness of the concepts and the songs, as opposed to Chris and Dan and Nick and Simon and Mark, normal sounding guys from England. So it's a balance, definitely, but I'm hoping that we manage to kind of do that in a way that people think is credible and not lame,
Yeah, well, I think the fact that you don't go by an alias and you actually are, I think that goes to show you're a black metal band that has nothing to hide, and you're the most upfront with it.
Well, I hope so, but obviously everyone has a different interpretation about what this genre means to them, I guess. So some people love the idea of spikes and corpse paint and I don't know, the more kind of like bestial warlust side of it, as opposed to the kind of nature and atmosphere kind of side of it. And don't get me wrong, I love all of it. I'm as big a fan of Archgoat as I am of Ulver or whatever. So it's kind of it all has its purpose, and I certainly like a lot of it. But from where we were coming from, just in terms of our own environment and the kind of things we were trying to relate, I think it made sense for us to have a less kind of shielded persona.
Yeah. Well, to some people, you're not truly cult because you're doing this interview. So.
Well, I know, and obviously, those people are, well, that's fine. You can listen to Hades, Archer, and to Archgoat and find a lot of meaning in that. And if that's who you are, awesome. They're great bands. But we want to be a bit more upfront, and I guess because of some of the stuff we've talked about over the years, people getting the right or the wrong idea about it. It's important that we're sort of sat in front of that and being open to being interviewed about those things and not kind of hiding away from any topics. So while people have opinions about us all, I'm kind of happy to discuss it, and I don't want to hide away from any of it because there does generally tend to be a reason for things, and if people just kind of come to their own conclusions, it's often the wrong one. So it's best to kind of be able to speak about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was always like those stupid rules, like if you're not really cult unless you wear corpse paint and you're from Norway. You're not really hardcore if you come from a rich family. I think there's always those rather strange rules to kind of make a genre seem more authentic. But I think in the end, what matters the most is the final composition of the music.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I guess when I was younger and a bit more kind of naive, perhaps I was, as I'm sure maybe people or maybe yourself, I was up for being a bit more elitist and oh fuck this, it's not true or whatever. But then the older you get and the kind of more worldly wise you become, you sort of realise that it doesn't really matter, and what comes out of the speakers is what's most important, and what you relate to and makes you feel something is the most important thing. And even if somebody else thinks it's lame or whatever, then well, they're going to miss out on that feeling or that sentiment. So maybe it's not for them, but it's all so subjective and so personal that I think that you just have to kind of find those things that resonate with you, and just hope that the music you make other people like. But if not, then you can't worry about other people being too true or too cool or whatever, because that's just their perspective, isn't it?
Yeah, and sometimes you fight so hard against becoming a cliche that you become that said cliche in the process.
Yeah, I think so, and I just think I think for us we've just tried to be kind of as authentic as we can be. There wasn't really a sense of what British black metal was before ourselves and a few other bands. So, I'm not saying we've all of a sudden broken the kind of the mold on this and groundbreaking somehow. But in terms of there was never any British black metal bands before we kind of started making records, really. And I guess other bands like Fen and Wodenstone and A Forest of Stars from the UK, there just wasn't a lot of it. So it's been nice to kind of be able to be some kind of flag bearer for what it might be, and I think that's reflected in how many bands have kind of come after us. So
yeah, Fen.
I'm kind of happy about that in a way.
Yep, Fen, Burial, and of course you can't neglect black metal from the UK without at least saying Cradle of Filth's name at least once. So.
Oh yeah, don't get me wrong, but then again, I'm really close friends with Paul, who was one of the original guitar players in the band. Paul Ryan, he was our agent for a long time, and I play in another band with Paul called Nine Covens. I don't know if you know that band.
I've heard of them. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So he said to me, which is why I can kind of speak with some vague authority on it, that they never really considered themselves to be a British black metal band, or at least Paul didn't. He always sort of said they were trying to be more like the kind of Scandinavian scene and trying to kind of ally themselves to, the kind of Emperors and whoever else, Thorns and Satyricon, those kind of bands. So it was interesting. They are obviously a British black metal band, in a sense, but because they weren't really playing up to those ideas. They were more about the kind of, I don't know, that more evil sounding sort of stuff. Then I guess, even though they are, I never really kind of widely considered them to be. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, definitely. But, I mean, with you guys and Fen, I mean, great. There's just there's a lot of great British black metal, so.
Well, I'm glad you think so, thank you. Yeah, and I think, it even goes kind of beyond us and Fen now. I mean, Fen are great friends of ours, and, like Frank from Fen, for example, or The Watcher, as you may have seen him described in his pseudonym. He also has this band Fell Warden that he does, which is amazing. Obviously, the guys from Woden's Throne, they broke up a few years ago, but they've got a new band called Nemerus, which is coming out quite soon. There's lots of amazing black metal from this country. There's A Forest of Stars, who I don't know if you know, or Prophecy.
Yep.
There's Ninkasag, who did their last album on Candlelight. There's Necronautical, who we've took on tour with us. There's Wolven Crown. There's Crimson Throne. There's Winter Mist. There's Peasant. There's lots of great bands that have come out, and it feels like there's a real strength in the British black metal scene at the moment, and probably because people kind of take it a bit more seriously these days.
Mm-hmm. Not much sun either.
Not much what? Sorry.
Not much sun either.
What, in the UK?
Yeah.
Well, there is today, but yeah, no, it's definitely a gloomier part of the world. So,
yeah.
But there's beauty in darkness. Let's not forget.
Yeah. Of course, I interviewed Aaron from My Dying Bride the other day, and because we've had rain pretty much every day here in New York City since this whole lockdown thing has happened, and the UK has had a lot of sun, and I was just like, I think you guys stole our weather.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting one. I live very close to the guys from My Dying Bride, and obviously they're a favourite band of mine as well. But yeah, it's the funny one. There's some great stuff, obviously from England, and they're definitely one of them, and it's funny thinking about them in a sunny context, because I just sort of associate them with the kind of industrial gloom of working class Britain, and rain and kind of misery. So it's quite interesting to think of them on a sunny day.
Yeah. So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today. Really enjoyed this discussion. Is there just anything else you would like to promote? I mean, obviously, touring is on hold for the moment thanks to a certain virus that shall not be named. Yeah, I don't want to give it any promotion. Is there just anything with Winterfylleth you'd like to promote for The Reckoning Dawn? It's coming out May 8th. Just any plugs you'd like to give? This will be uploaded by midnight, so if it hasn't been announced, don't say it.
No, it's fine. So obviously the new album's out next Friday, so May the 8th. We had a new lyric video out yesterday, which is available on YouTube if people are interested in that, or on, I think Metal Sucks did a premiere of that yesterday. We have provisionally booked a tour in October with our friends in Panopticon, another great US band, and some other guys in Alda who are also a great American band as well. So that's happening in Europe and the UK in October, all being well if the virus kind of goes away by then. And on a personal note, I've also got another band that I work on, which is called Atavist, which is coming out on June the 19th, also on Spy Farm. So that's more like kind of atmospheric, kind of death doom stuff. So we've got an album called Absolution coming out. If people like Winterfylleth and like the kind of emotions we create in that music, maybe they'd be interested to kind of hear that record as well. So no doubt we'll come back around for that one and maybe discuss the album as and when it's in the press cycle. But yeah, I'm really keen that people kind of hear that as well, because it's the first album we've made with that band in 13 years, and I'd be interested to see if people kind of relate to that after so long.
I look forward to hearing it. But thank you so much. Everybody, we are here with Winterfylleth, The Reckoning Dawn, out on Spine Farm Candlelight May 8th. Buy it then when supplies officially last forever. And we'll see you next time on Heavy New York.